Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I don't sleep with curtains open because of crawlers. In fact, when I moved into my current house, I installed dual curtain rods so that even if my light-blocking curtains are open, there's a layer of privacy shears behind them to block any sight. I have seen the crawler 4 times. I now live in Brisbane, Queensland. I don't truly know if it's the same one, they were all seen at different locations. It's been years since I last saw one, but I still feel like they were the same creature, or at least, they knew me. The first time, I was a very small child. Perhaps 4 or maybe 5. My house was an old-style flood house, so it was technically 2 stories tall, but under the house was where we kept the car and our laundry room. Upstairs was where the living areas were. We were one of the only houses there. It was in the early days of the town and there were only a few other houses on the cul-de-sac. The back of our property was maybe 500 meters from the ocean, but you couldn't see or hear the coastline from the house. There were some light rainforests surrounding our fully fenced house. My bedroom faced the back of the property. I woke up one night, which wasn't unusual for me because I was a very light sleeper. This particular night, my parents hadn't closed my curtains. When I looked towards my window, I could see it. Keep in mind, I was on the 2nd floor. It was looking through my window. I couldn't see much, the only light was coming from outside, but I could see the silhouette of its body. It was pale and thin, but still the frame of the creature was huge, easily 2 meters tall. It was hanging off my roof, holding onto the frame of my window, and even though I couldn't see its face, I just knew it was looking at me. I was terrified. It's been almost 2 decades since I saw it, but I can still remember the intense fear I felt. It took me so much courage to get out of bed and walk to my parents' room, where I finally fell back asleep. My parents told me it was just a dream. The next time I remember seeing it, I was probably about 7 or so. I had moved houses probably a few months before, and my new house, about a 16-hour drive from my old place, still in Queensland, was a single-story home, but still on the coast of the country. It was a lot further from the ocean, about 5 kilometers, but very much the same kind of area. We were one of the only houses in the area and I had no neighbors. I woke up one night because I heard something banging against the metal fence. In Australia, we have a brand that makes fences and roofs out of corrugated metal that's been painted. They're quite common, 6 feet high cream-colored metal fences. And they make an unmistakable noise when something hits them. I have no idea how anything could climb one of these fences. They're completely smooth with nothing to grab onto. Even in my teens, I tried sneaking out by jumping the fence and I just slid right down again. At first, when I woke up, I thought some birds must have landed on the fence, but the noise continued for longer than it would take a bird to land. My next thought was that someone was trying to break into the house. I turned over in bed to face the window and saw it. Well, I actually didn't see it at first. It was very dark out and I don't remember much of the moon. As my eyes adjusted, I could only just make out the figure hunched down in front of my window. Even in the hunched down pose, it was still huge. This time I didn't run to my parents. Their bedroom was no longer across the hall, it was all the way on the opposite side of the house, and I'd have to pass so many uncovered windows to get there. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I eventually woke up in the morning, and once again my parents told me I must have been dreaming. However, from then on, they always came into my bedroom and closed my blinds before bed. The next time I saw it, I was 9. I know I was 9 because I had just moved schools and made friends with a girl who we'll call Casey. She invited me to stay at her house one night, and I was so excited. She was the first friend I'd made since moving schools, and it had been ages since I'd gotten to have a sleepover. Everything went great, the night was perfectly normal, and I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Casey crying. I sat up in bed and asked her what was wrong. She pointed towards the window, where I saw the thing again. Unfortunately for me, Casey had a night light, and I could see much more of the creature than I ever had before. It looked so crusty and dry. It was almost totally white, devoid of any real identifying features, except it stared at us with black eyes and mouth agape. Casey's window was small and it had to hunch down to see us. We both got up and ran crying to her mom. She turned on the outside light and brought us back inside the bedroom and pointed out a large gum tree outside the window that she tried to explain just what we saw. We argued with her. The thing we saw was right against the window, not several meters away, and it wasn't to the left, it was to the right. Casey's mom eventually let us sleep on the couch. A couple months later, Casey stayed over at my house. When I woke up in the morning, Casey was gone. I asked my parents, and they told me that Casey had gotten up in the night and started crying, begging to go home. When I saw her again on Monday at school, she told me she got up at night to go to the bathroom, and when she walked past the lounge room, she could see the tall skin monster crawling through the trees at the bottom of my backyard. She never came to my house again, and I lost touch when I moved schools a year later. I don't know what it was I saw. It can't have been sleep paralysis. I was able to move and speak and everything. And it wasn't a dream because someone else saw it. I don't know if this relates in any way, but when my girlfriend moved into my house a few months ago, she opened the curtains one night before bed. This time it was a full moon. I had already fallen asleep. I'm now living in a 2-story house with my bedroom on the 2nd floor again. I woke up in the middle of the night to my partner getting up and closing the curtains. When I asked her why, she told me she had a nightmare that there was a tall, skinny, white man clinging onto my roof, almost like a spider, and it was peering into my bedroom. She said it must have been a hallucination. She had been up all night playing G's on her phone, and when she got up from bed it jumped back onto the roof. I still haven't told her, but his description of what she saw is exactly what I saw the first time I saw the crawler. Only, now I'm living in a busy neighborhood with plenty of houses, unlike past experiences where I've been one of the only houses on the block and surrounded by forests. I have heard mimicking many times, but have always drawn it up to imagination. Sometimes I will hear her walk into the room and say hello at night, but when I roll over I see the light coming down the hallway and I realize that she's still in the lounge room on the phone. I've heard my mother's voice a few times too. Throughout my childhood in all the homes I've lived in, we've had issues with dogs barking at nothing, and security motion detector lights randomly coming on at night when nobody is there. I don't know if those two things are related or not, but I've heard similar happenings in crawler-related stories before and thought I'd mention it. So those are my stories. I don't know if I've seen a crawler or something else, or if I've seen anything at all.
I want to share an experience I had while training with my National Guard unit at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. I moved from enlisted to officer via ROTC, and was attached to a unit in my prospective military occupational specialty while in the program. I don't really want to give specifics on my service, as the community is small enough to identify me to peers. In 2014 my platoon decided to conduct nighttime land navigation at Fort McCoy from 20:30 to 0:30. While the Army is typically all about buddy pairs, night land navigation is one of the few cases we can do things solo if we so choose. Having done night land navigation plenty before I step off alone, compass, map, and headlamp in hand. For those who do not know, land navigation involves seeking out markers on a course by plotting their coordinates on a map and moving there via terrain reference and compass. At night this is typically done without light as much as possible. When light is used it is red. This minimizes damage to night vision. Ostensibly, these methods also keep you concealed in a tactical environment when employed with noise discipline. I bring this up so you can understand a few things about my circumstance. I was moving through the woods while making a token effort to be hard to spot/hear. The woodland I was in was part of a larger forest system, but was frequently traveled. That night we had some 15 soldiers clomping around. My illumination was a toggleable headlamp, but was toggled to be red when turned on. To cycle to white light I have to turn it off twice. My assigned points will take me to the other side of the course and back. A good hour and a half of walking as the crow flies. They're more or less in a straight line, so I estimate 2.5 hours out and back. I know if I come back too early I might be given another set of points. So I resolve to walk out, take a break for an hour, then mosey on back. The first half of this goes as planned. I get my points without much trouble and wind up sitting on a hillside at around 10 at night. It's cloudy, but the moon is full. I can see well when the sky is clear, poorly when it's not. Occasionally, I see a red light bobbing in the distance below me. Once a pair of platoon members passed down the hill from me, using white light to try to read their map. I startled them when I asked if they needed help. At the end of my break there's no more motion in my area. Most people had likely already walked out and back, or they were too lost and took the handrailing road home. I'm feeling pretty at one with my surroundings, having sat in the same spot eating stale Skittles for a good long while. Owls hoot, trees sway, all is well. I trot down my hill and step through some brush. I'm in a clearing where prairie intersects forest. There are some dead trees in the area, one of them is split halfway up. At the top, about 15 feet, I can make out a head and shoulders silhouette against the clouds backlit by the moon. I walk up to ask how they got up there, and if they're stuck, when the shadow twitches and I get the impression it's turned toward me. I stand there looking at it, and it's maybe looking at me. The situation feels off, but I'm not going to let a battle buddy punk me. I ask if they need a hand. Mid-sentence, the moonlight comes back. It's clear the thing on the tall stump is not a soldier. This moonlight glimpse is the best look I get at the thing. It looks like a stretched out bald person. Its long arms are clutching the stump. I can't make out the face, but it looks pinched. By that I mean I couldn't see its eyes or mouth, like they were small and in the middle of the head. It's skinny like it hasn't eaten, but it's tall and obviously strong to have made such a vertical climb. It was definitely facing me. It probably was the whole time I was in the clearing. Maybe since I came down the hill. Maybe my speech was startling. I swear loudly. It rapidly scurries down the trunk. I flick on my red light and catch it on all fours moving toward the brush line in the direction I'm heading. Automatically, I keep toggling the lamp to be in white light. That means it goes off, then flashes red. In the flash I see the thing at the wood line, but I think it's flipped around and is backing in, probably to keep eyes on me. In the few seconds it takes for me to get to white light, it's gone. I scan the tree line, which is silent. When it moved there was a scraping noise, plus the woodland brush is dense. If it was still running I would hear it. I reason that it must have stopped. It must still be watching me. I fumble out my knife and keep looking around the woods in front of me. After ages I start inching along a perpendicular path to my initial route of travel, an angle that will link me up with the hardball road that runs up and down the side of the course. Once on the road I can take it back to where my platoon is parked. My major problem is that the road is 10 minutes of walking away from my current position, mostly woodland. That can't be helped, I have to get out of the clearing first. My progress on that front is painfully slow. I'm fighting my natural urge to freeze in place like a deer in the headlights. After sidestepping a good 10 meters I hear a corresponding rustling and think I see movement. It's enough to get me to turn and bolt, right into a downed log which trips me. I scramble up to my feet and look back to the wood line where there is an audible commotion. I glimpse a leg and ass moving back into the woods. At this point I'm done with the whole situation, but don't want to run again. I start power walking to the road, turning to look as much as I can while seeing what the thing is doing. Over the movement of my own kit I can hear it moving alongside me, parallel. As I near the end of the clearing I think I hear it picking up pace as if to cut me off. I made the decision to sprint. When I enter the woods my path is clear, but I think I can hear it in my periphery. I don't stop, and run hard until I hit the paved road. I bite it hard a few times along the way, but recover with a frantic speed I cannot consciously replicate. Once on the road I run perpendicular to the forest until I don't think I hear it anymore. I'm winded from my breakout run. From the middle of the road have good visibility and decide to walk to catch my breath. It's quiet for a while. Then I hear a branch move around 30 feet in the air from the woods I had just fled. I snap my gaze up, see a pale ovular face, half in shadow, peeking at me from around a trunk. I take off again. After way too long I made it back to the headlights of our LMTVs. It's 12:15. What happened, cadet? Did you get lost out there? You're covered in mud. Did you fall down? Why are you out of breath? I got lost on my way back. I knew better than to claim I saw a monster. Already my reaction had left me feeling foolish. In the years since drilling at Fort McCoy I have never experienced anything like that again. McCoy does not have a history of disappearances. As far as I know neither do the two closest towns, Sparta and Toma. I've done night land navigation alone a few times since without issue. This is less from courage, and more from me deciding I must have misinterpreted the situation. Maybe the world is weirder than I thought.
When I was around 10 years old, my family was moving back to our hometown from El Paso where my dad was stationed on a base there. Our realtor M was showing us houses. So, we pull up to this house and it's overgrown with bushes and ugly crabgrass. The sidewalk is uneven and jagged, and even missing in some places. The white siding is pretty much brown by this point, with tree branches overhanging almost every inch of the roof, so all you can see is this cave-like entrance into the front door. Em informs us.
Oh yeah, it's been on the market for years, and there is no electricity, so we will be seeing it in the dark.
We go inside and the sight that hits us is remarkably depressing. There are broken picture frames and glass all over the floor, as well as red splotches of some sort of powder covering everything. A very large chest is in the center of the living room, about 5 feet in from the front door. The house smells like something old and wet, yet fresh and rotting at the same time. No one noticed the smell but me. We leave the living room, and all I remember next is going to look into the garage. Now remember, Em told us there was no electricity and we would be seeing the house in the dark. The singular light bulb in the garage was glowing blue. Not a bright iridescent blue by any means, but a sickly, dim blue that was just bright enough to illuminate the walls and floor and bathe the garage in the same shade of blue it was radiating. My parents and Em both made a comment that was weird, and maybe there was some sort of charge going to the light through the power lines. I couldn't care less because what I was staring at was worse than any creepy light that was working when it shouldn't have been. There was something inside the garage. It looked like a human, or maybe what used to be a human, but it appeared wet. Its skin kind of looked like if you grabbed it, it would just slip right off. I could see veins through the skin, which was so pale it seemed almost see-through. This thing was emaciated. I could see all its ribs, I could see hip bones. Its arms and legs consisted of just enough fat in the thighs and upper arms that you could tell that's what they were and not just sticks slapped on a lump of flesh. The neck was just long enough to appear proportionately weird, and the head was turned to look straight at me. If you could even say it was looking, because where normal eyes would be there were just holes. There were stringy clumps of hair hanging from the tops and sides of its head, and I got the sick sense that it was happy to see me, almost as if it was thinking that finally I could tell if it stood up it would be tall, almost ceiling height, so about 8 feet. I watched this thing crawl on all fours. Think hands and very long feet, not hands and knees, from the center of the garage directly under the light bulb. It crossed in front of me and my family and Em and disappeared into the wall. It kept its head turned on me the whole time, and I followed it with my eyes the whole time. I don't remember even feeling scared in the traditional sense. I felt invited. I felt intrigued, and more than anything I felt like it had been waiting on me. Just me. I felt like it was telling me, come in, make yourself at home. You're welcome here. My parents decided they were thoroughly creeped out though, and without seeing the rest of the house, we left. They told Em that they weren't interested, and that was that. We fired her shortly after because she made a habit of showing us abandoned houses in the pitch dark. I was the only person who saw the thing. But my parents, after thinking I was asleep in the car on the way home, started talking about how once they opened the garage door they felt like they were trespassing, like someone was watching them. Also that it felt colder all of a sudden than the rest of the house, smelled like rotted meat, and something just wasn't right about that blue light.
It was January 2017. I was living at home in northern Minnesota. My parents started being more strict on me as I was a recent high school graduate, and when I would come home the door was usually locked. On nights like this I would sleep in my truck. On this particular night it was about -17 Fahrenheit and I was a little worried about freezing up after shutting off the truck. So, I texted my friend Jay to see if he wanted to tag along. Jay and I took off driving around in the night until after 12 midnight, when we decided to drive up to the base of a local mountain and park the truck for the night. I quickly nodded off, but awoke to Jay nudging my shoulder about 20 minutes later saying he felt like we weren't alone and felt watched. I was too tired at first and told him we would be alright, but he was persistent. I relented, so I drove towards town, and by now the time was close to 1 a.m. I found a turn off the highway after driving for about a mile and decided to park on a narrow trail that had been snowed in. I drove about halfway down the snowed-in trail before I decided the snow would be too deep. We then parked, shut off the truck and closed our eyes. My eyes had been closed for about 5 minutes, but now, I had the feeling we were being watched. Not sure if Jay had been asleep, I decided to open my eyes to check, but what I saw instead was horrifying. As I looked through the front windshield I could see a giant humanoid prowling in the bush line about 50 feet from the parked truck. It was coming closer and my eyes were stuck to it. It got closer and now I could see it through the passenger window. It felt like it knew I was looking its way, as it was creeping up to the truck. I could tell Jay was watching by now, as he was also frozen with fear. The thing disappeared from view, creeping towards the rear of the vehicle on the passenger side. We were both still in our seats and hadn't said a word. I even stopped breathing for a bit, I'm sure. Suddenly, the rear suspension began to lower as this being climbed into the truck bed ever so slowly. I could see Jay watching it, but I was so terrified I couldn't look. The humanoid was over 9 feet tall. I was driving a Chevy Silverado, so the thing sat down like it was climbing onto a bench seat. As it sat, it began to hunch over and then lower its head into view through the back window. It had big, yellow bloodshot eyes and its skin was dark, almost black, with a small mouth and small nose. It peered in, then Jay freaked out. It quickly jumped from the bed, leaving the truck shaking. For some reason, when it jumped off, my truck lights flashed 3 times, each flash brighter than the last. Jay was screaming, "Go, go, go." I tried to start my truck, but it wouldn't turn over. I turned the key back and forth multiple times with no success. But it eventually started. I never did figure out why the ignition failed to turn over. I hauled ass about 100 yards down the trail until I realized I wouldn't be able to turn around in the snow. I stopped and shifted into reverse. When I looked to back up, I noticed my spotlight was in the back seat, so I told Jay I was going to look for whatever jumped out of my truck. He was quite reluctant, but I didn't care. I had to see it again. I parked the truck and began scanning the bush line towards where we saw it flee. I caught a glimpse of it as I was scanning from left to right. At first I only saw its lower half and passed it, then Jay said, "Did you see that?" I slowly returned the light back to the creature and examined it from bottom to top. It was so horrible. The claws hung at the lower leg area even with the creature erect. The fingers were about a foot long. It was skinny and looked malnourished and decrepit. I looked at the crotch and it had nothing there. It was just smooth. Its chest and abdomen looked elongated and very muscular, but skinny and long. I then brought the light to its face and that's when my heart dropped. It was looking at my eyes even with a spotlight to the face. It smiled from the small mouth, only to show a bigger mouth with sharp, crooked teeth. It then backed up while facing us and disappeared.
This incident occurred about 7 years ago when I was in my late teens on a muzzleloader mule deer hunt in the far northeastern part of Utah. This area contains some of the most remote places in the state. I've been frequently out in this area spreading in Summit County that cuts in and out of lower Wyoming since before I can remember, including lots of hiking, backpacking, camping, hunting, and being involved in some of my grandfather's work. I am skeptical of things not proven by methods of science, but I don't deny all of those things. I find that it's impossible for science to know all that is out there in our vast world. My grandfather was a recently retired biologist and former conservation officer for the state, and was a regional specialist and was over wildlife and habitat management for many years. He did everything from habitat management programs to quite literally wrangling moose to be transplanted and darting black bears. He has seen mountain lions, bears, birds of all kinds, small mammals, ruminants, plants, and natural phenomena for the majority of his life, and he understands so much that many people, including myself, will never be able to even imagine. He's scientific, honest, straightforward, level-headed. He's agnostic and is not superstitious and often used to tease a certain commanding officer who thinks Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and other beings exist. Other than this experience, he has never encountered an animal that he could not at least partially identify, and other than the natural, innate fear of being in close quarters with a bear, drunken belligerent hunter, or incredibly potent tranquilizer medication. He's told me over and over he's never been terrified of an animal or experience like this, only curious or surprised. It was late September and we were in a small camp by a lake in the high Uinta Mountains, hunting both grouse and mule deer with muzzle loaders. The camp was a small collection of men and women my grandfather had worked with over the years as a supervisor, biologist, commanding officer. And these were people I grew up with. One of the women had shot a buck deer, injuring but not killing it immediately, and they had lost track of it. Devastated by the thought of wasting the animal, she returned to camp in the afternoon, upset and concerned that the deer had run into an even more secluded area of the mountain which was hard to reach from the trail that she had shot from. It was a place my grandfather was familiar with because it was such a pain to get to, with lots of deadfalls and steep terrain. We volunteered to go in the late afternoon to search for the deer, following a scant blood trail that she had tracked for a while before getting fatigued and intimidated by the terrain. Because both my grandfather and I were in good shape and he was so familiar, it didn't seem like a big deal. Before we left, she mentioned hearing what she assumed were coyotes, which made her even more so concerned that if the deer died, they would ruin the meat and hide before she could harvest it. We took off in the early evening, expecting to be back within an hour or two after searching and having our guns with us, in case we found the animal still alive or came across another buck worth trying to harvest. It was steep in places, with lots and lots of deadfalls of varying heights, making the hike slower and more tedious than we had hoped, making us understand the other hunters' fatigue. She had marked the blood trail with bright orange pieces on the trees, which we followed for maybe 20 minutes, and then it got hard to track. The sun was getting close to setting at this point, and we knew getting out would be just as long as getting in. We had just about decided to stop when we found a spot near a fallen tree that looked like it had been recently bedded down in, followed by spatters of fairly fresh blood, and we continued for longer. When the sun had just about set and the light had faded from the trees, we removed the firing caps from our guns to make them now completely safe, as it was now illegal and irresponsible to hunt in such absence of decent light. My grandfather pulled out his large Maglite flashlight from his pack, and I put in my headlamp to begin the hike back, using our GPS to find the trailhead. About 10 minutes on the way back, we started to hear more movement among the trees. It was normal for animals to start moving now that the sun had gone down, as animals would likely be starting to head towards clearings for water or to graze in the safety of lower light. Small and distant sounds of crunching leaves, pattering of hooves of animals, or small bits of movement in the trees from squirrels or birds were common and expected. We did not expect the deafening, disturbing sound we heard next, which vaguely and initially reminded me of a coyote howl, but by a few seconds it was unidentifiable, frightening, and human-like. It started with what sounded like a person screaming, but then got louder and more intense, with a screech to it. So unlike any coyote or any animal we had ever heard. Then was the almost chittering that came in between the shrieks, and the movement of the trees becoming almost calculated, almost threatening. We stopped dead in our tracks, frozen, as my grandfather started using the light to look around. I was far more freaked out than him at this point. He just seemed perplexed, curious, and a little baffled at what could make that sound. It sounded human, but with no words, with no urge of the tone of help or "I'm just screaming to mess with you." We continued on after it mostly stopped, and it seemed like the other, natural, and distant sounds had gone almost silent. I listened intently to the sound of my boots crunching with the dry aspen leaves underfoot, trying to tell myself that it was just some weird coyote with a horribly deformed larynx or something. Maybe 20 minutes from the main trail that would lead us to the truck, we heard the chattering sound again and the sounds of thumping against dead trees. Looking around with our lights, in between deadfall maybe 12 or 15 feet in front of us was a large human-looking thing. It was almost hunched down with a long, slender arm around the front of a standing aspen. The aspen, of course, was pale white with the knots being dark brown, and whatever it was had skin almost as pale. I caught a very brief glimpse of its face. It seemed round and the eyes seemed sunken, and I could not tell you eye color other than a flash of reflection on the eye from my light, and that its face seemed sunken and emaciated. I didn't see any fur or hair. I never felt like it looked right at me, more my grandfather, and just in our direction, almost confused and curious, like he was before with the sound. For a mere couple of seconds, I caught a glimpse of it, but that was it. I looked down at the ground, holding my eyes shut tight, trying to imagine being safe and secure in the truck, and my grandfather took a few stumbling steps backward toward me. I heard the thing go off to our side, moving quickly and with purpose through the trees, to the side, and then drop down behind us, I would assume according to the sound, but I hope it went in the opposite direction. My grandfather turned to where it had veered off, as to follow it, but he soon stopped and looked at me. I had never before and never since seen him so confused, baffled, horrified, curious, and in awe. I was crying at this point, ugly crying, trying to muffle my shaking breath and voice, and I asked him, "What was that?" Over and over I asked, and he had no answer for me. He pulled his gun off his shoulder and put a cap back on the nipple of the igniter, making the gun live, and he then carried it in front of his body in his arm. He pulled out another headlight to put on himself. We started walking again towards the trail, as he listed off as talking to himself as to what it wasn't. Things like couldn't have been a deer or elk or moose, it had arms, it was hunched, it stood upright, or a bear. A very sick bear. It could have been a bear. Was it the light? We heard the sound, the screeching human howl, distantly once more before reaching the trail, which was dirt and gravel but fairly flat, and with no deadfall. We practically jogged to the truck. I locked the doors immediately and sobbed, and my grandfather turned on music as loud as possible to try to distract me on the way back to camp. I was a mess when we arrived back, and he went to talk with the others by the fire when he got me settled in my sleeping bag in my bunk. He explained some to his friends, but I don't know what all was said. The next day, everyone was extra sweet to me, trying to comfort me and saying it was probably a sick animal that looked scary in the dark. A deer the hunter shot was found the next day in the daylight, scavenged quite harshly by what I assume were coyotes. To this day, he has no clue what it was, nor what that sound was, and before and since I've heard both coyote and many other animal sounds that never even compared to that sound. The scientist in me, and in him, the hopeful and blissfully ignorant people in us hope and speculate it was just a deformed, sick animal in scant light, but I still have no clue of what that thing was, and I hope I never ever experience it again.
I just remembered an experience I had when I was around 12 years old. I'm 21 now, so it was quite a long time ago. I want to know if anyone else has had a similar one. I haven't been able to explain it to this day. It was definitely the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. It's also kind of out there, nobody believes me to this day. Anyway, this happened sometime in July 2013. I lived in rural Poland. I woke up at around 3 a.m. and I couldn't fall back asleep. I started looking around my room. I was contemplating getting on my computer but was too lazy to actually get up, so I just lay there until something caught my attention in the hallway. My door was slightly open, so I could see just a little bit. Before I tell you what I saw, let me give you a quick picture of what my house looked like back then. When you exited my room, there was this long hallway. In the middle of it to the left was the entrance to the kitchen, and right in front of it to the right was the door to the bathroom. At the end of the hallway, back then, was the front door with a little window on top, so the moonlight kind of seeped in. It must have been a full moon or close to it because I could see that the hallway was decently lit. Anyway, what caught my attention was this small head peeking at me behind the slightly open door. It was really close to the ground. At first, I didn't really think much of it, and after a short while, I thought to myself that it must be my dog. My dog is a Maltese. He's small, and back then he used to sleep above my head on my pillow. So I reached my hand up to see if he was there, and sure enough, he was sleeping there. That's when I got kind of confused. We didn't have any other animals in the house, and I lived with my mom and my grandpa. Both of them were asleep, and they sure wouldn't peek at me in the middle of the night on what seemed like all fours. So I quickly looked back at the door and I saw this thing hiding behind the door. I don't know how long I lay there in shock, but eventually, I decided to get up and investigate, run to my mom's room. I quickly got up and ran to the light switch, turned the light on and fully opened the door, and when I did, I saw this thing's legs. It was entering the kitchen. It was on all fours and it didn't run. It seemed like it didn't even care about me, as it was moving kind of slow, like it was taking a casual walk. Its skin was grayish and it looked like it was dirty. It had these black spots on it, maybe dirt, I don't know. Its legs were skinny and lanky. Once again, I was paralyzed. I don't even know if I was scared at that moment. I think I was just shocked at what I was seeing. When it disappeared in the kitchen, I ran to the bathroom and locked myself there. I didn't come out for a long time, and when I did, nothing was there. Nobody woke up either, not even my dog. He always chases people when they run. I have no idea what it was. All I know is that I for sure wasn't dreaming. I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach when I saw this thing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.